analysis of multiple universes, even the tiniest detail is important, for a fraction in the space-time continuum is powerful enough to create multiple realities. These realities exist side by side, eventually coming together to be known as the multiverse. Only one being is capable of seeing all these realities and understanding their complexities, and that being remains I, the Watcher. In my centuries of existence, I have witnessed men turn on each other, and I have seen heroes rise and fall, separated by their circumstances that one would identify as trivial. Even the greatest heroes are subjected to the power of raging emotions. For in one reality, I witnessed two great war heroes over different beliefs. For one man, Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, was desperate to protect Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, from the wrath of Tony Stark, the Iron Man. Unfortunately, in that reality, the only damaged item was Tony Stark's pride, and Rogers defeated him in battle.
He's my friend. So was I.
However, the story I am about to tell you is not of that reality, for in this reality there was an entirely different outcome. In the reality I am speaking of, there was more damage done, and this damage called the appropriate authorities. Tony stared at the footage in disbelief. Steve stood a few meters away from him, shielding his face. He desperately did not want to look into Tony's face at this moment, for he knew that if he did, his eyes would betray everything. Tony turned to Steve and asked if he knew. When Steve did not give a response, Tony asked the question again, only this time, he raised his voice. Steve did not respond. His silence had given Tony the answer he required. Tony could not believe it. He would have never thought that a man he called his friend would have stood so low that he would hide something so important from him. Worse still, Tony could not believe Steve would go as far as protecting Barnes after knowing what Barnes had done. Steve had always known Barnes killed Tony's parents, and he hid that from Tony. Now Tony was going to make him pay. Tony's suit began to glow, and his face was quickly covered by the suit. He was ready to take on Steve. Steve took up his shield in a fighting stance. This was going to be a long fight. When all of the chaos broke loose, Tony could still not hold back his feelings. At this point, Barnes had emerged out of hiding and joined in the fight. Barnes and Steve worked together to put down a pissed off Tony. However, their combined efforts could not go through his rage. Tony blasted the duo with his energy projections, flying towards them and hitting them hard with his armor. Steve threw his shield towards Tony, which Tony deflected without much effort. Barnes came up from behind him, attempting to land him an uppercut. However, Tony quickly blocked his attack and counterattacked. He was gaining the upper hand in the fight. The three men continued to war at each other. Soon enough, it was all three of them on the floor. Tony got up first and Steve next. Barnes remained on the floor, unconscious. Steve immediately told Tony that he wasn't a killer and he would always regret whatever actions he was about to take. Tony quickly replied that he did not care anymore, and Steve had no right to dictate what he would regret or not. With the sign, Steve threw his shield towards Tony. Tony held his breath and quickly used his magnetic arms to deflect the shield. As he took that step, he let his anger take over. Little did he know that the force he applied was way too much, and Steve was too weak to block it. The shield pierced his abdomen, and his wide eye became wide open. Blood trickled down his nose as he fell to the floor, gasping. Tony looked in shock as Steve began to choke. Tony ran to Steve, immediately realizing what he had done. As he held Steve's bloodied body, he began to shed tears. He could not believe it. Steve smiled at Tony and told him that it wasn't his fault. With that out, Steve closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then the sad reality hit Tony immediately. He had just killed Steve. He had just murdered his friend. When Tony opened his eyes, he was in some kind of containment unit. He looked around, wondering how he had gotten to this place. The last thing he remembered was holding Steve's dead body. What on earth was going on? The containment unit doors opened, and Tony was surprised to see a woman dressed in a rather ridiculous armor stepped into the room. Seeing her, Tony attempted to attack her, realizing to his shock that his suit was gone. He tried to make contact, but he could only hear a void. The woman chuckled and informed him not to bother trying to contact any of his gadgets. She laughed that the area they resided was far from home, and he would not be able to reach to his little toys, even if he wanted to. Tony looked at the woman in the eye and asked where he was. She identified herself as Hunter B-15, which Tony only found as amusing. When he did realize that she had no smile on her face, he knew immediately not to push his luck. B-15 informed him that he was in an organization known as the Time Variance Authority, and he was here to answer for a crime against time. Confused, Tony asked her what crime he had committed against time. B-15 signed and informed him that he had caused a mighty death by killing off Steve Rogers, who was meant to live in the original timeline. Fortunately, the timeline was now pruned, thanks to her soldiers. When Tony inquired what pruning meant, she noted that it was a system where the new timeline would be isolated and prevented from any expanding. As for Tony, he was going to answer for his crime immediately. A confused Tony watched in shock as Hunter B-15 left the room. In my time as the Watcher, I am bound by one rule. The rule of non-interference, for if I interfere in the workings of the timeline, I shall defeat the very purpose of my existence. However, in the existing reality, the very fabric of space and time was ruined when the rather vengeful Sylvie took the life of He Who Remains. In order for me to prevent the impending multiversal war from taking place, I must intervene in the slightest capacity, one interference allowed by the imminent destruction of time itself. Mobius woke up from his slumber, trembling. He could not understand the flashes that he had just seen. It seemed unbelievable, as if it was a dream, but deep down, Mobius could understand that there was something that felt real about this dream. It was the beginning of a war. A multiversal war. He could see the various realities clashing into one another. Men and women dying as the energy released from this mighty war wiped out civilizations. At this point, Mobius knew he had to do something. He reached underneath his bed and picked up his time stick. There was a new prisoner in the headquarters. It was time to have a little chat with Tony Stark. Tony was surprised when another seemingly elderly man stepped into the containment unit. The man held a weapon, and Tony put himself in a fighting stance. The man immediately spat, telling Tony that he didn't need to try fighting him, as it would only end badly for Tony. Tony asked what he wanted, and the man introduced himself as Mobius. He said that he kept on getting flashes of a multiversal war that was coming, and he needed Tony's help to stop it. When Tony asked why he should trust him, Mobius noted that the next few hours, Tony would appear before Ravonna, and she would most likely sentence him to be pruned. When Tony inquired on what it's like being pruned, Mobius said that he would be transported to a world of nothingness, known to others as the Void. Tony immediately coughed and snorting that he wished he didn't ask. Tony asked what Mobius would require of him to do, and Mobius noted that for now, he didn't have any idea first. And first off, he needed Tony to escape. As Mobius stepped out of the containment unit, he winked, and Tony smiled, knowing he would strike soon. From what Tony could gather, Mobius had left two gadgets in the containment unit. It was a large stick and a pad-like gadget. Tony picked up the items and looked into the pad. It was some sort of tempad. From what he could gather, Tony manipulated a few buttons, and in a few seconds, a time door opened. He quickly went through, running as fast as he could. B-15 could not believe her ears as Mobius told her what he had done. She could not understand how he would have the guts to set Tony Stark free, even when the man had clearly attempted to corrupt the sacred timeline. Mobius held his breath and told her that what he was doing was for the better. He knew that if Tony Stark was pruned, then he would not be able to stop the incoming multiverse war. B-15 bit her lips, cursing at the mention of the multiversal war. She couldn't understand. As the timekeepers existed, there would be nothing like that. Mobius noted that in his vision, there was something off about the timekeepers. Holding her hands, he begged that she gave him this chance to prove that he wasn't insane. As far as Tony was concerned, he still had unfinished business. Now he was going back for Barnes, and he was going to make sure the man paid for his sins. Right now, Tony was at the phone booth, carefully watching Barnes slip through the crowd. The smart Tony Stark had calculated that if he went back in time and pruned Barnes, he would prevent his fight with Steve. If Steve didn't die, the TVA wasn't going to come for him. He was creating another reality to end another. He believed it was the right step to take. He kept on following Barnes, smiling when the man had entered an isolated area, as the trained assassin Barnes must have already figured out somebody was following him. Tony entered a street corner and suddenly realized Barnes was nowhere in sight. Before he could utter a word, he felt a fist on his face and fell to the floor. On getting up, he chuckled to see Barnes looking as dead as ever. Barnes grabbed him by the collar and threw him to the nearest wall. However, Tony wasn't going to stay down for long. He wasn't with a suit, and that didn't mean he couldn't win this fight. He got up from the ground and charged towards Barnes. Barnes advanced and grabbed Tony by the neck. Stark immediately kicked him into the gut, stunning him, and prepared to blast Barnes into nothingness. However, he should have remembered that Barnes was a trained assassin. Barnes immediately pulled out Tony's tempad and touched it. The next thing Tony saw was a huge flash of light. B-15 stepped into the chambers, dragging Mobius by the collar. Ravonna followed, trying very hard to conceal her breath. B-15 pushed Mobius to the floor and let Ravonna do the talking. Ravonna noted that Mobius had just released a variant who was bound to wreak more havoc in the timeline. When the timekeepers inquired of Mobius why he took such a drastic step, Mobius snarled that he was fighting for the truth, immediately throwing a sword in the direction of the timekeepers. For in his vision, he had seen Sylvie attempt the same. Ravonna, B-15, and Mobius opened their mouths in awe as they stared forward. When the light faded, Tony could tell that he was in a crowded area. He could hear the screams of innocent civilians as he flew in his suit. Suddenly, he recognized the figures fighting on the ground. It was Loki and Steve. Tony immediately blasted Loki, only to be blinded by another flash of light. Then he realized he was flying again. A time loop. Tony had been cursed. Apparently, he was in some sort of time cell, if that was even a thing. Tony repeated the exercise several times, ensuring that things happened the same way that they happened in the original timeline. But what was the issue? Why could he not overcome this stupid loop? Upset, he immediately flew to Steve and grabbed him by the collar, cursing on why he wouldn't let him be. Steve looked confused, wondering why someone he had never met before was being so rude to him. Suddenly, Tony realized that the time loop had not caught up to them. He needed to do something right now. He needed to fix things with Steve. He looked at Steve and informed him that doing the right thing would get him killed eventually. Steve was still in shock, wondering why Tony would say such a thing, given that they just met. Tony continued saying that he just wished that he had the good heart Steve had. If he did, Steve wouldn't be dead. Of course, Steve remained confused. Tony stared at Steve and smiled, noting that his father made that shield Steve used. And as far as he was concerned, and Steve was totally worthy of it. Then the light came again. When Tony opened his eyes, he was surprised to find himself with Mobius and B-15 in the same corner he had been fighting with Barnes a while ago. B-15 told him that Barnes had been safely taken away from the scene and that Tony was lucky that he did not do something stupid. Tony smiled and admitted that he had learned his lesson. Mobius went further to add that the beliefs that the Time Variance Authority had built their principles are now obsolete, as the Timekeepers were mere androids. Tony was confused, and B-15 noted that he would understand as they talked. Right now, they had to ensure that they prevented the multiversal war, which was fast upon them. I looked at the man who sat in his well-hidden world. He wore purple robes and laughed as he was pleased, which annoyed me. He knew that I could see him, and he could see me. You were not meant to interfere, he said. Your death in the sacred reality is the reason I had to interfere, I blurred out. I could not have the multiverse be destroyed. Well, all damned anyways, the man said. He was known as He Who Remains. His story tied to the war in more ways than one could ever fathom. That is going to be it for What If Tony Stark Had Been in the TVA in the MCU timeline. What do you think would have happened? Do you think Kang the Conqueror would get involved? And do you really think that He Who Remains would know the Watcher? That being said, I really appreciate everybody supporting the channel so far, and I have a lot of plans with some of these What If series, and this will be a part of a bigger storyline in the future with Iron Man being a part of the TVA and potentially stopping He Who Remains. That being said, I do want to say a few things here, and that is only 8 or 10% of you guys are subscribed, and I really hope you guys can give me a subscribe if you guys enjoyed the video. It really goes a long way. I got a lot of original content. Avengers 2004 is going to be coming out soon, so if you guys want to see more updates, I do want to post more on Patreon, so make sure you support the Patreon if you can. That would be fantastic. Marvel Zombies Revenge, it's also another project that will be coming out soon. I know a lot of people have been excited for it. I've been posting on Twitter about it, and I've been posting on my Instagram and the community page, and I just want to say, we're looking for voice actors. If you're interested, you know, give me a shout. I'll have my email down below, but if you're interested, if you want to volunteer for voice acting, let me and the crew know, because the script is fully finished. The lines I had to critique, but it's gonna be awesome. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this Marvel's What If. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with latest content. But anyways, as always, guys, take care.